beginning of the Khulafa al-Rashidin and right through to modern day. And in the past we had covered the period of the Khulafa al-Rashidin, and we spoke about the Umayyad Khilafah, and we had two lessons about the Abbasid Khilafah. And today we're going to talk specifically about Al-Andalus. So okay, somebody's on the laptop. I can't move the screen, so I don't know who's. Okay. All right. So the beginning of the conquest of Al-Andalusia started right from when during the time of the Umayyad Khilafah. Now, as you may remember, that the Umayyad came to power during the time of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, and lasted in rule for approximately 90 years or so. During that time, they had reached a vast expansion of spreading Islam and defeating enemies, and they had reached to North Africa. And North Africa, they met the group of people, or a race of people, were known as the Amazighs. The Amazigh, they lived in North Africa, and they still do today. And they initially resisted the Muslim armies, but later on they entered into Islam, and because of this they, alhamdulillah, managed to become a great force which helped Islam and the Muslims. And one of the greatest forces that happened was that they produced a leader called Tariq ibn Ziyad, a very righteous man who wanted, and in fact he sort of requested, and he knew that there was a need for the Muslims to go and help those who were being persecuted in what is known as Spain. At that time there wasn't anything called Spain. It was divided into different kingdoms, and it was mainly ruled by a group of people called the Visigoths. The Visigoths were sort of people originated in, if you like, the areas of Germany and that area, and they managed to kick out or overthrow the Romans in Spain, and so they took charge of it. Spain had at that time obviously Christians, but also had Jews as well. Many Jews were living in Spain and participating in it. And at the same time, there was the Visigoths who came, and they later on converted to Christianity as well. But most people in that time, most of the kings and the rulers, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Quran, إِنَّ الْمُلُوكَ إِذَا دَخَلُوا قَرْيَةً أَفْسَدُوهَا, that the kings, when they enter into villages, they corrupt it, and they make the honored amongst the people, the nobles, they make them, they humiliate them, and they enslave them. And that was the nature of the kings and the rulers. They tried to always take control of people, asking for taxes and the like. So in 711, Tariq ibn Ziyad, he sought permission from the Emir at that time of North Africa, who was called Musa ibn Nusayr, and he was granted a permission. He took with him 7,000 soldiers, and they crossed the Mediterranean, and they landed in the area which was sort of the closest area between North Africa and Spain, and which is present day what? Does anyone know what it's called present day? this area, like a rock there. Yes, Jabal Tariq or Gibraltar. And that's why in Gibraltar is actually Jabal Tariq. That's why it still retains that name, because he landed there. And that was the closest point. I think it's about 8 miles, 8 mile stretch of sea, which is considered quite close between North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula. So he went there. He met the army of Roderick, and it was said that his army was around 100,000. But time is short to go through the intricacies of the battle. But Tariq ibn Ziyad managed to choose a battleground which helped him. It helped to an area which was enclaved, allowed him to protect his back, and so they were able to fight off the army, and they managed to defeat them. And they continue to go forward in the they managed to go forward and carry on with the conquest. However, the ruler, the governor of North Africa, Musa ibn Nusayr, he requested that from Tariq not to go too far, because they only had limited number of soldiers, and obviously it's a large land. There's lots of one of the features, if you like, of Andalus was had lots of castles, which were fortresses, and it wasn't just just plain land. There's lots of hills and the like. So it wasn't an easy conquest. However, Tariq ibn Ziyad was quite enthusiastic to go forward, and he continued. Musa wasn't too happy with him, and then he had to end up basically come and join him and bring more reinforcements to enable them to conquer this land and to defeat the Visigoths. But as you can see, within about 20 years, most of that peninsula, or in fact all of it, was under the Muslim rule. And so much so, the Muslims were advancing a lot that they even managed to go into France, and they carried on going further and further, and they reached an area very close to Paris, the Muslim armies. This obviously panicked the Christian West, and so they sent reinforcements coming in to help, and a lot of people, not just the French, but now even people from Britain, etc., all came to try and push away the Muslims, and they managed to stop the Muslims from entering any further. Then the Muslims had to retreat later on. So at that time, Spain was part of the Umayyad Khilafah. However, in the last sort of 10 years or so, the governor that was in charge of Spain, he basically said, why should I need to be part of the Umayyad? So he announced that he's going to be separated. He's going to leave the Umayyad Khilafah, and he became a governor unto himself. And that's unfortunately a feature that we will see in history a lot. Comes the Abbasid Khilafah, which we spoke about. I'm not going to repeat a lot about it, but the Abbasids, obviously, when they came in 750, they rallied their support. They managed to overthrow the Umayyads, and they started to systematically eradicate anyone who has any connection to the Umayyads. So they were afraid, basically, that there might be anyone from the family remains, and if any of the Umayyads remained, they may cause another revolution. So they wanted to, and in fact they used not just un-Islamic but unethical, barbaric means of dealing with the Umayyads. They invited them, they brought them in, and they gave them the security that, look, you've come, you're safe. And they brought them in, most of them, in like one big palace, and then they just executed them all, in cold blood. Basically because they wanted to end any perspective of the Umayyads reaching power again. However, there was one guy who was called Abdurrahman. Abdurrahman was the son of Muawiyah, the son of Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik. So he is one of the ancestries going back to Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan. At the time he was in his house, he heard that the Abbasians were coming, and as a result he sort of packed up his stuff and said, we need to get out. And it was only him and his brother who were remaining as part of the Umayyad family. So they managed to flee. The Umayyads the Abbasids were killing basically the males. They weren't going to kill the women. They weren't killing the children, but the adults, if you like. So him and his brother, who was about 14 years old, and Abdurrahman at the time was around 17, 18, so still young. They knew that they were coming for them, so they escaped, and they did in fact escape, and they ended up going into the river to try and just swim. It's actually quite almost like a movie, really. And as they were escaping, the Abbasid army sort of caught up with them, seeing them that they were swimming, and they said to them, look, basically don't run away, come back, you're safe, we're not going to do anything to you, etc., etc. Abdurrahman, he didn't trust them because already he heard what they had done. His brother, however, probably now tired and young and tired from swimming and running away, he said, no, we'll go back, they've given us security, they've promised us, they're not going to lie, etc., etc. So he goes back to them, and they say to Abdurrahman, come back to your son, and he said, no, I'm not coming. And so they go and execute his brother there and then, and that even reinforced his understanding of what they would do. So Abdurrahman, who is obviously from the Umayyad dynasty, his mother happens to be Berber from the Amazigh, and so he said, my best place really is to try and go to North Africa. That's the best way. And so through hiding and escaping, I think he managed to get to North Africa. North Africa at that time was being fought by the Khawarij. The Khawarij were rebellious against the Umayyads. So now he had, if you like, he was almost like sandwiched between the Abbasids chasing him, the Khawarij not happy with him, so he had to stay in hiding for a good few years in North Africa with his uncles, his maternal uncles. And at the same time he was thinking, well, what's the best place for me to go? And so at that time, Al-Abbasid had overthrown the Umayyads, but they hadn't reached Andalus. So Andalus was still separate. And at that time, Al-Andalus was a mixture of Arabs, it was a mixture of the Amazigh, it was a mixture of the people from the indigenous people who became Muslims. Obviously there were still non-Muslims there was Christians, there's Jews. So they in themselves were from the Arabs, there were from Quraish, there was Yemenis, different types. So amongst themselves they were still also not very clear about who was, because they'd left the Umayyad. Now it's almost like a free for all. So Abdurrahman used this as a great opportunity to go forward and to try to rally support for help. And so he basically told them who he was. The Amazigh who are in Spain, they trusted him because his mother is from that tribe. The Umayyads, the remnants of the Umayyads who were in Andalus also wanted him. The Yemenis, so they all rallied around him, and if you like, they prepared the ground for him. And in 755, he crossed over and he fought the existing emir who was there, and he managed to overthrow him, and therefore unite Al-Andalus again as a independent Imara, independent emirate from the Abbasid Khilafah. Now, were the Abbasids happy just for him to stay in charge? And obviously they weren't. So they also sent an army to try and subdue this part of the Umayyad emirates, which they hadn't managed to subdue. However, they were met with intense resistance, and they didn't manage to take over Al-Andalus. So they went back and they just said, okay, let's just stick to what we have. And on this, one of the Abbasid Khilafah, whose name was Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, he was sitting with his comrades. So the Abbasids go back to which tribe? Which Arab tribe? Which Arab tribes do you know? Quraish. So they were part of Quraish. In fact, why are they called Al-Abbasi? Why are they called Abbas al-Khilafah? You didn't attend any of the lectures, huh? Online. Yeah, it was probably just one person listening to my online lectures. If you were to hazard a guess, why are they called Al-Abbasid Khilafah? Relating to Al-Abbas. And who is Al-Abbas? The uncle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Abbasid Khilafah are from Quraysh. They go back to Al-Abbas. Umayyad Khilafah goes back to Umayyah, who is one of the earlier, also from the tribe of Quraysh, but if you like, a little bit further up than Abbas, who they go back to. Anyway, the point being is, once Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, he said to his people around, he said, who is the Falcon of Quraish? Who is Saqar Quraish? So they said, they started naming people. They said, maybe it's you. He said, no, it's not me. They could have. He said, the Saqar is this guy, Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, because he left, he was persecuted. He left by himself, but he managed to establish an emirate all by himself under persecution from both sides. So he said he is, and not only that, he resisted the Abbasid as well. So with the presence of Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, and that's why he's called al-Dakhil, because he entered into Al-Andalus, the Umayyad part of the rule of Al-Andalus lasted for around 200 years, that part of it. And it was a time when, again, there was a lot of, there was a lot of stability, being unified. They were stable. Obviously, there were some attempts to try and, there's always attempts to overthrow or to, but generally it was stable. And with the stability comes prosperity. Abdurrahman the third managed to establish a strong rule, and following on from his grandfather and so on, they managed to establish the Andalus and establish Qurtuba or Cordoba as the capital of Al-Andalus. And Qurtuba became one of the prominent cities. It was in fact probably the top city in Europe during that era. It was a city not only prosperous and constructed and well architected, but it also had lots of cultures. Remember, there was Christians there was Jews there, they were all living together, they were all participating in the society, and it was flourishing. Not only that, but they became, they had power. There was a lot of scientific and artistic achievements in Al-Andalus due to that Al-Andalus was a bridge between Europe and the rest of the Muslim world. Now, what was happening in the Muslim world, for those of you who attended the lecture on the Abbasid Khilafah, was that during that time there was a big cultural move in translating a lot of the works from Greek and from Indian cultures and from Persian. It was all translated to Arabic, and that allowed the Arabic language to become a vehicle for knowledge and a vehicle for the exchange of culture. So later on comes, it goes through periods of strength and weakness. During one time, what we had was one of the Khulafa was a weak one. He was from the Umayyads, but because he was weak, he was young, he was appointed an official. This guy called Muhammad ibn Abi Amir, who was also titled himself Al-Mansur. He took control. The Khilafah became almost like a puppet, just a figure there. But he was the guy who took control. He started to look after the affairs. However, what happened is slowly there started to become fragmentation, because now the strong Umayyad Khilafah was weak. Every tribe or every faction wanted to take control. They in fact killed the Khalif, who was a nominal Khalif. They sacked Madinat al-Zahra, which was established by Abdurrahman III. And a lot of chaos, causing Al-Andalus to become sectioned into a number of kingdoms, if you like. These sections was a period, so now ends the Umayyad period, if you like, the Umayyad era, and now we have period which is titled Muluk al-Tawa'if, or the petty kings. And these were all people who each faction rallied behind its own race, if you like. So we had Arabs, we had, even from the Arabs, you'd have people from Quraish, you had people who were the Yemenis, you had the Berbers, you had the Slavs, who were considered those who became Muslims under from the indigenous people. Each one wanted to formulate their own rule, and in fact that's what happened. Leaders, local leaders, governors, they declared themselves independent rulers, and so you had almost Al-Andalus divided into more than 30 kingdoms. Okay, each one saying that we are a kingdom, we are in charge, we are Amir, and so on. And that caused, obviously, what comes with this division? What's going to happen with division? Weakness. وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا فَتَفْشَلُوا وَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ. Allah says, do not argue amongst yourselves, because you will then lose power and you will become weak. And so that's what happened. The petty kings now started to compete with each other, each one trying to annex something, take something from each other. And by doing this, at the north of Spain, if you like, was the Christian kingdoms, nominally the kingdom of Leon, and the kingdom of Castile, and the kingdom of Aragon. Those are three kingdoms. I'll show you the map in a moment. But they were different kingdoms at the north of Spain, and they still had their power, if you like, to a certain extent. They were still rivals amongst themselves. So what happened is that these petty kings now would actually seek the help of Christians against their Muslim brothers. Why? So that they can expand their territory. And that's what happened. So now you have all this, the collapse of that, the unity that we spoke about. People started to, the petty king started to use, very much like, like today the media, trying to employ the poets and to employ, each one trying to boast their own, achievements and etc. And that led them to become slowly, slowly weaker and weaker, and so they became prey to the Christian rulers. And here you see the name Alfonso, who was became a king of this joint kingdom between, who was the king, of Leon and Castile. He managed to use this weakness of the Muslims, and so therefore launch an attack against the Muslims to try and gain back as much of the land. And they managed to actually take possession of Toledo, which is in Arabic is Toledo, and that was the capital. That was the capital of Spain for a long time, during the Visigoth time, and even later on. I mean, when the Muslims were in control of Andalus, they made Qurtuba their capital, but even Toledo is a big city, well fortressed, etc. But now he managed to topple this this kingdom. Some of the petty kings, so we still have now these petty kings, okay? Some of them said, let's look for some outside help. And so what did they go for? They went to a new entity. So Abbasid Khilafah is in, if you like, in Iraq and that kind of area. In North Africa now, there was a new dynasty that has rose up, which was under the name Al-Murabitun. Al-Murabitun. Al-Murabitun, or in English they call them Al-Muravid, okay, the Latinized version. They were basically came from the word ribat. Ribat is like almost like an enclosure where people just like camp, you know, camping, not camping, but like people go on a retreat. So these guys started off very small. Time doesn't allow us to talk about a lot about how they would develop, but they basically were developing in North Africa, and they gained strength in North Africa by going back to the teachings, the proper teachings. By that time, a lot of North Africa was not practicing proper Islam. People were indulged in a lot of distractions, alcohol, womenizing, lack of hijab, you know, all these kind of social ills. So there was a need to revive, and that's when Al-Murabitun came into power. So some of these petty kings said, let us go to these Murabitun and let us at least seek help from them. This tells you a little bit about the history of the Murabitun, but I mean time is short to go into that. But let's seek help of the Murabitun to allow us to gain back at least protection against the who? Against who? The Christians, yeah, the kingdom of Castile and Leon and Aragon. Let us try and to repel them. So how are we going to do that? Seek help from the North Africans, who was Al-Murabitun, Al-Muravids. And so they went there, they asked for their help. Al-Murabitun, at that time the commander was called Yusuf ibn Tashufin, and he was happy to come and help. And so he sent an army, and that army went and managed not only to defend the kings against Alfonso VI, but also to inflict a severe defeat on the Christians in a battle called a Battle of Az-Zallaqa, because that was the name of the plain at that time. So Al-Murabitun managed to help the petty kings, although not all the kings wanted them to come. It was only like one of them said, let's. So now Al-Murabitun had helped. They didn't come to stay, but now that they'd helped, one of those kings said, let us ask them to stay. And so what happened is, if you like, by de facto, the Al-Murabitun became the rulers of Al-Andalus, again bringing unity to Al-Andalus, although met with resistance by some of those kings. Why? Because they don't want to lose their power. Each one wants their own leadership. So they ended up, you know, fighting Al-Murabitun, trying to pull them back, etc. But that led ultimately to the collapse of the Murabitun, because they were, if you like, they were heavily being opposed, and people were getting resistance to the Murabitun. At the same time, in North Africa, a new revolution against Al-Murabitun under the names of Al-Muwahhidun, even more puritanical, and also, you know, trying to adhere to a very more idealistic way of Islam. They overthrew Al-Murabitun. So in a way, they now became a force which which was going to replace Al-Murabitun. So this was going to be replaced by Al-Muwahhidun, or in English known as Al-Muwahhads. So these were people who were led by a guy called Ibn Tumart. He was quite an enthusiastic guy. Again, he came up with some strange ideas as well, saying that he was the Mahdi and the like, and that even he came up with the strange notion that he's ma'soom, and he doesn't make mistakes. That's how it got to him. He started off as more of a religious leader, but then gradually they grew into a resistance, and they toppled Al-Murabitun in North Africa, and as a result then they went on to conquer the rest of Al-Andalus. So they replaced, if you like, the rulership of Al-Murabitun. Alright? Now, Al-Muwahhidun made Seville their capital, and Seville in Arabic, does anybody know? Probably you might have heard of the word Ishbiliya. So Ishbiliya or Seville, Ishbil. In Arabic it's Ishbiliya, but it's Latinized to Seville. They made that their capital, and they constructed a masjid and so on. Now, some people say that Al-Muwahhidun were very strict. Obviously, they had certain lifestyle, puritanical. They almost were quite resistant to what's happening in Andalus. Now, Andalus, remember, is become prosperous, bringing all the knowledge over from the Muslim lands. Libraries were developing, science was being written, scholars, philosophers, thinkers, architects, engineers, everything was happening there, to the extent that Christian Europe was sending their nobles to come and study in Qurtuba, to learn Arabic language. The Arabic language was the language of the globe. That was the language to know if you wanted. Nowadays people learn English, isn't it, to try and English is almost like the universal language, the global language, whereas in that time Arabic was the language. So the Europe was sending its princes and princesses to Cordoba to learn Arabic so that they can learn the sciences and learn the knowledge. But at the same time, with all this prosperity came luxury, came wealth. With wealth comes fatigue, comes sort of I say relaxation, but it comes almost like a form of what's the word, Shaykh Abdul Hadi? It comes like people become very lax in their attitude, no longer practicing. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ warned us. He said, "Mal faqru akhsha alaykum." I'm not afraid for poverty. I don't fear poverty over you. وَلَكِنْ أَخْشَى أَن تُفْتَحَ عَلَيْكُمُ الدُّنْيَا. I'm afraid that the dunya will be open to you, and then you will start to compete with one another for the dunya, and so it will destroy you, like it destroyed the people before you. And that's what happened in Spain. People are starting now to compete for the dunya, and so they were competing because of all this prosperity, if you like, all this luxury that they had. The Muwahhids tried to bring back people to a more puritanical kind of life, without all this allure of the luxury, and that may have caused people to resist them. Their policies towards the Jews and Christians was less tolerant, as people report, and so that might have resulted in, if you like, popular anger against them. Anyway, the Muwahhidun still were still sort of pushing away the Christians and force, but it was an on and off. So with the popular attack against the Muwahhidun, the popular resistance, coupled with the Christian wars, in 12, the combined, if you like, Christian forces from the different rulers, they managed to defeat the Muwahhid ruler, Muhammad al-Thalith, and gradually they started to decline rapidly and slowly. And what happened after that? Slowly and slowly, Muslims went back to their, if you like, the kind of petty king kind of scenario. They retreated back to the different cities that they had. The Christians now were taking city after city and gradually managed to take a lot of the Muslim cities of Ja'in, Ishbiliya, and Cordoba, and Granada remained as the only city. And even Granada, to an extent, if you like, at the end of, towards the end of, but this is not the end as such, but towards this kind of time, there was only two main Muslim kingdoms. One was the kingdom of Granada, and that was under the rules of what's known as the Nasrids, and that was around sort of 15% of Al-Andalus. And the other one was the kingdom of Seville, Ishbiliya, and that sort of formulated about 10%. Now what happened is the Christians have taken a lot of the cities, okay? These were the remaining two. The rulers of Granada were known as Bani al-Ahmar, the children of al-Ahmar, because one of their grandfathers had red hair, and Ahmar is red, and so they were known as al-Ahmar, Bani al-Ahmar. Now they were thinking, okay, everybody now is just thinking how to survive. So what are they going to do? They're going to do what the petty kings did before. How can we get an alliance with the Christians to help us? So what they did is they made a treaty, a pact with Ferdinand III, and basically the treaty was that he would leave them alone on condition that they pay him 150,000 dinars every year. So they pay him a form of tax. Secondly, to give him a certain number of castles and things. And thirdly, and most annoyingly, was that they would support him in any battles that he had. So they would be his allies in any battles. And they agreed and they signed this. Bani al-Ahmar, a guy called Muhammad ibn Yusuf ibn al-Ahmar, he agreed and he signed this pact. Ferdinand now wages war. Against who is he going to wage war? Huh? Africans? No. Who is the remaining two cities in Andalus? Granada and Seville. They're still out holding out, yeah? He's made now an alliance with Granada, so he launches an attack against Seville. And therefore he forces the Muslims of Granada to fight with him against their Muslim brothers in Seville to topple Seville. And so indeed the Muslims of Granada, they go and fight their brothers with the Christians, and they lay siege to Seville for more than 17 months, and after which Seville collapsed. Okay? And now that Seville had collapsed, the Christians, if you like, the way that they were dealing with things is every time they sacked a city, they would force Muslims either to convert to Christianity, or they would be killed, or they should be exiled, they should run away. So they would leave them. And a lot of time, if you like, imagine, whenever a city falls, Muslims go to the next city, and that one falls, they go to the next city. So now most of the Muslims were in Granada, and so Granada had a big population, a big density of population. time is short, and I think we've run out of time. But this was the last remaining thing. And here, look at the dates: 1232. For over 200 years, Granada remained under Muslim rule, even though the Christians were strong everywhere, because of this treaty, but also at the same time because the Nasirids, they also sought help. From another Moroccan or North African entity, which was called the Marinis. They would also help the Nasiris to repel the Christians. So it's going back to what happened before. Who did they seek before? They seek before with the Murabitun, remember? They asked them to help them from North Africa. And then the Muwahhidun came along. And now they are asking help from the Marine. The Marinis come and they help them to repel the Christians. Yeah. Not only do they repel the Christians, but they also reconquer Seville and Cordoba. See, so these Marines are very strong. Again, they only 5,000 people, but because they had very deep iman in Allah, they had this all helped them to defeat. As they were leaving, because the Marines again didn't come to stay, as they were leaving, one of the governors asked them to say, look, you're strong, you might as well stay here. And they stayed in one area which was of Malaga, south of Spain. One of this Ahmar family, I think it was the third one down, he didn't like this. He said, oh, these now Marines have come from Morocco. They're going to take over and they're going to do the same to us like they did the Muwahhidun. They're going to take in the Murabitun. They're going to take charge of Andalus. I'm going to lose my throne. Yeah? So what does he do? He goes again now he goes and puts his hand in the hand of the Christians once again to fight Al-Marinis, who had just helped them to repel the Christians. So you see how it's all all betrayal, if you like, one after the other. So anyway, Nasrids, they had they stayed in power, as you can see, for 200 years due to this notion, being helped on the one hand. The Christians were a little bit uncertain about trying to conquer them. There was attempts, but nothing happened. And they managed to establish a famous palace and garden complex, which is known Alhambra, the red, or in Latinized Alhambra, again quoting in line with the name of their tribe, the Al-Ahmar, Ahmar. However, towards the end, if you like, the most devastating thing that happened was the marriage of Isabella and Ferdinand. Isabella was from the kingdom of Castile and Ferdinand was from Aragon. They married together, and by marrying they united their kingdoms. Alright, so they have a unified kingdom. And in the past, when you read the history of the kings, especially in Europe, you see how they marry intermarriage between different countries. And by doing this, they announced that that's it. Even one of their pledges is that they're not going to have a wedding except in Alhambra Palace. That's where their wedding is going to be. Anyway, time is short, but to cut a long story short, Alhambra and the Granada was prone to a lot of internal conflicts. We talked about how they were fighting, Muslims were fighting against it. And towards the end, this is the last sort of 20 years if you like, son was fighting against father, brother against brother. This is what happened, and that obviously caused the kingdom of Granada to be split and to be weakened and to be factioned, always giving and then sometimes siding with the Christians against their brother, etc. And that all resulted in the end in losing the Granada. And this guy who was called Abu Abdullah. I mean, most of them were called Abu Abdullah, to be fair. Most of the Bani Ahmar were named, their names was Muhammad, Abu Abdullah, but he was known in sort of like in the Latinized history as Bu Abdil. He surrendered and he actually handed over the keys to Ferdinand and Isabella. I mean, initially, before he handed over, they almost like gave him some promises. They said, "Look, we're not gonna destroy any mosques. We're not gonna cause any harm to Muslims. We're gonna do." He gave him a lot of stuff that, you know, if you hand, and he believed them. He handed it, but obviously, they were quick to break their treaties. This guy, Abu Abdil or Abu Abdullah, he left Al-Andalus. And he stood on a hill overlooking Alhambra, Granada. And some say, I think the historians say that hill is still there, and it's called the last, if you like, the last crying, or the last Arab crying or something. And as he was standing there, he started to cry. So look, he was the guy who basically sold out, and he sold out. He was putting his hands in alliance with the Christians to fight his brothers, etc. And so his mother said to him, "You should cry like women cry, because you couldn't look after your kingdom like a man. So you should cry like a woman." Our sisters might not be happy with that. But anyway, that's what his mother said to him. And then he went to Morocco. When he went to Morocco, he was actually arrested on charge of conspiracy to demise the Muslim authority. So even then he was made to look the way he was humiliated towards the end. But subhanAllah, I mean, even though we're saying all this, we've spoken about a lot of sad scenarios, but that's the nature of the kingdom. Reality is that Spain, which wasn't known as Spain, it only became known after the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon and Leon, they united and they formulated this Spain. Muslims, Jews, Christians, they all lived together. They all participated in a society. When there was unity and there was no warring, there was lots of prosperity. Today, a lot of what makes Europe has benefited from the Muslim presence in Spain. You know, the contributions in art, architecture, science, agriculture. You know, even today, if you go to some of the castles here in the, has anybody been to castles here? Visited any heritage places? Yeah, these old ones. Yeah, when you go there, you find that the castles are. Yeah, there's almost like a feeling of coldness. You know, you feel like it's lone. You know, it's not a nice place to be. Whereas the palaces and the castles in the Muslim land were full of gardens. They were beautifully engraved. They were really places, and that was something that later the Christian kings and queens of Europe learned from the Muslims, and wanted to take that off as well. In addition to all these other things, navigation and textiles, because they brought a lot of the knowledge from the translated knowledge. And now that the knowledge was in Arabic, they started to translate it into Latin and therefore take it back to the rest of Europe. And some even say that part of the reasons, or if you like, the foundation for the Renaissance, the Reformation that happened in Europe, was founded on all the knowledge and the science that came out of Muslim Spain. Okay, so that brings an end to the Muslims. Obviously, unfortunately, towards the end, the Christians went on a rampage. The Pope instituted the declaration for something called an Inquisition, to test everybody for their faith. Initially, it was to test Christians, Muslims who had become Christians, to test them whether they were really Christians or not, or were they just pretending. So it was like, test them, and they would go Inquisition, basically inspect their lives and to make sure they'd really converted to Christianity. Then slowly that Inquisition started to become to force people to change, and to make sure until in the end people had no choice. The Jews, the Muslims, they had to either convert to Christianity, and they made sure that they did practice Christianity, or they would be killed. And some managed to flee and run away from the persecution. If you look here at the map, you can see that this gives you a rough idea of how the entities were during the time of the Muwahhideen. You can see Aragon there and Castile, Leon. You see how even the Christian kingdoms were quite fragmented as well, but when they came together, they defeat. You can see. I don't know if we can we make this bigger? I don't know if we can make this bigger. I don't want to play about with this. I might end up. The masjid might end up sort of shutting down. The fire alarm will go. Well, anyway, if you look closer, you might be able to see where it says Seville, and you can see Cordoba, and you can see Jaén. You can see say Almeria, Malaga. All these were obviously all Muslim-controlled areas. And like say, Muslims reached Paris, so all of this was under Muslim rule before. And this is another picture. This was of an earlier date, where this was during the time of the sort of petty kings, where different. You can see how it was factioned up as well. So, what do we learn from Muslim Spain? That there's a lot to learn, no doubt. Unfortunately, lots of rivalry, lots of conflict, lots of internal fighting caused weakness. But at the same time, on the other hand, coming together, unity, does cause prosperity, does cause knowledge to grow, science, arts, etc. We have famous ulama who are from Spain. Until today, you have like the likes of Ibn Hazm and Ibn Rushd and Al-Qurtubi, who's the owner of the tafsir, and a lot of the ulama who were based, and they came from Al-Andalus because they grew there. And it is unfortunate that it was lost, because it contributed so much to the rest of the world. And for 8 centuries, the Muslims were in Andalus, and they presented a whole civilization for the rest of the world. And alhamdulillah, still today, Alhambra, I am told, is either the 2nd or the 3rd most visited heritage site in Europe. People, come from different places. It's a beautiful place to see, actually. And it's still there. The names are still there. You go to some of the roads in Spain, you'll still find them, Muslim names. Even though, despite all this Inquisition, they didn't wipe out the history that was there. Qurtuba, the famous masjid and the big masjid that was built by Abdul Rahman the third, has been changed into a church, and that's probably like most of the mosques there. And in fact, when you go to Qurtuba Mosque, when I went there, me and my wife, there's a guy at the entrance and saying, "Don't pray here. Do not no praying inside here." Because what happens is you get some of these, some of the Muslims who come from the Gulf and etc. And because it's like a form of, almost like a kind of a relic. So they'll go there, they'll find the area which used to be a masjid and try and just do 2 rak'ah there. And where he's saying, no praying here, no praying here. Okay, Jazakumullah khair. We end there, inshallah. Subhanakallah wa hamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Does anybody have any questions they want to? Or sisters, if they have any questions, obviously. Oh, I didn't show you this picture of this is the Alhambra. Great architecture, mashallah. And in fact, if you go there, you find beautiful inscriptions. Yeah, it's still preserved, mashallah. Inscriptions and even poetry in the walls, and it is really fascinating, beautiful. And when you go there, like I say, when you compare this to some of the castles, the castles in the UK, we can see they're very cold, very dull. This is a place you really wanted to live in and enjoy your time. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
It's been converted to
Church.
church.
Yes.
And it's not allowed to pray inside.
No, halas. But when you go there, and you will see the areas which used to be the masjid.
You can see because the church extended.
Yeah, it's an extension. So even they have the arches, red and white arches, which show the areas.
Population of Muslim over there around.
Now in Spain,
No, around. Yes.
I'm not sure about the numbers now.
In Malaga, they have a big Moroccan population.
Yeah.
A lot of Moroccans
Yeah.
settled in. So in southern Spain, there's some.
So a lot of Moroccans, there's Algerians, and maybe a little bit Tunisians as well. I don't know. But I